the subject of today's Sunday lecture. And the subject of today's Sunday lecture is a chance for me to take new perspectives in the way in which we look at type and the way in which type operates through its aura and strategy, and to see that in the connection to the other, in the way in which that operates through fundamental relationships. I've never really had a chance over the years in my teaching, in dealing with partnerships, to actually differentiate between the various kinds of connections that we have in terms of the way body graphs meet each other, that everybody learns at the very beginning of their process. We're all fascinated with our connection to the other. Most novices in human design are fascinated with seeing their chart connected to somebody else's chart. It's it's revelatory at that level. But it's a generic. I mean, to talk about an electromagnetic connection. If you talk about an electromagnetic connection isolated as a theoretical concept, then I think that it's really easy to grasp. That is, my basic description of this, going back to the very earliest days of human design, was, well, you have a gate activated at one end and you have a gate activated at the other. And that's an electromagnetic connection, and it is attraction and repulsion. It is love and it is hate. It is a spark that can be there in any relationship. However, any of those descriptions that I've ever given for the way in which we connect to the other has only been given in the theoretical generic. In other words, an electromagnetic is an electromagnetic, so the assumption is if you're a projector and you have an electromagnetic connection with a generator, that it's going to be the same as your electromagnetic connection that you might have with a manifestor. Well, it couldn't be further from the truth. It's not like it changes what is the generic. It's electromagnetic, but it's an electromagnetic that operates in a very different way. And I think where it is most dynamic in the way in which the differences are expressed is when you come to themes like compromise. And of course, compromise is difficult's always a funny word to use. Compromise is always the place where any relationship can develop problems. No relationship can escape the dilemmas that arise from compromise. So compromise is a very powerful force that exists in any relationship. Any presence of compromise means that there is always going to be a bone that's being chewed on. It's there. And it isn't going to go away. And awareness is nice. I love awareness. It's a wonderful thing. But it's not like awareness can give you an advantage when you don't have one, in the sense of what compromise does. You're still going to remain locked into the laws of the way in which those mechanics operate. And so compromise is something that is very profound when it comes to understanding any kind of relationship or the potential of any relationship. But when you see compromise in the way in which it operates in fact, it's so very different. It's so very different. It depends. It depends. Let's look at the auras for a moment. And let's begin with the generator. We begin with what is the vast majority. By the way, it's wonderful to, I don't know if all of you have taken advantage of it, but if you haven't, go to the Human Design Resource Center and check out the global survey. The survey has passed 100,000 entries, which is really impressive. And that's a lot of material to work with analytically. And we just recently added the percentages for all of the incarnation crosses. that have been activated, and it's really interesting to look at this incredible database. So it's something to check out. And you'll see that, when you look at generators, basically they represent about 2/3 of humanity, about 66%, somewhere in that neighborhood, the combination of generators and manifesting generators. And of course, this generated field is life itself. It is life itself, and in many ways it establishes the conditioning standard of what life is. I mean, if you take the 2/3 of humanity that are generators with their open enveloping aura, and that you understand that they're open and enveloping everything else on the planet, everything is within, the thrall, if you will, of the generated field. So, the non-generative types, whether they're manifestor or projector or reflector, that they are deeply conditioned by the world that is generated by the open and enveloping generator. So think about the nature of compromise for a generator. When you're looking at your design, and you look at your design and you're looking at it through the eyes of being a generator, there is a dichotomy that's important to keep in mind. That red center is enormously powerful. It's enormously powerful. And yet at the same time, the vulnerability of what isn't colored in, the vulnerability of what is open, is also, just as powerful. In other words, that generators, for their deep capacity to be able to generate the life force, are at the same time the most deeply open to conditioning. This is one of the things that's always been so obvious to me about the inability of generators to wake up spontaneously. Just wake up spontaneously. And they don't wake up spontaneously because it's not as simple as, turning on the response mechanism and awakening the generator or waking the generator's sacral to its power. There is this deep conditioning that has to be cleaned out of the vehicle. Deep conditioning. So if you're a generator and you have been unaware and not operating correctly, operating as not self, you're in a relationship, and in that relationship you have compromise with your partner or your child or your parent, then you're going to take in that conditioning, that conditioned compromise, at a very deep level. And it can be extremely painful. Again, understanding the way in which the aura operates, the fact that you're dealing with this openness means that there is this openness to all of these connections in a way that doesn't operate in the others. Think about the manifestor. You have an electromagnetic connection with a manifestor. Now, what does that really mean? This is a closed and repelling aura. And one of the things we know about electromagnetism is that it's attraction and repulsion. Well, guess what? The electromagnetic, the way it works in a manifestor, is it moves them constantly towards the repulsion. Constantly. These are the ones that, you can't live with them and you can't live without them. They made all that up. And compromise for a manifestor. The compromise for a manifestor is the spontaneous raison d'etre for simply saying, I quit. Very simple. They're closed. It's a different kind of aura. Oh yeah, the connection takes place. Oh yes, there is this fundamental generic quality in it, in the way in which it works. After all, think about compromise and what it is. It's a bitch. It really is. Think about it. See, when you're at one end of a channel and you don't have the other end, and when I say you, I'm actually speaking as if, I was your genetic imperative. And as your genetic imperative, you're looking at that other end and you're saying, I got to have that. That's what I want. That's precisely what I want. I've always wanted it. And it's too bad when I get it sometimes I can't hold on to it. There's this whole genetic imperative to get the other side. Okay, so then you meet the other side. And it's very exciting. And then you realize something. There's a problem. Because it's not just the other side. See, they have what you have. And in fact, they're not attracted to you at all. Think about what makes compromise so difficult. Just from the genetic point of view. We don't have to turn that into, psychological discourse. Just from the point of view of the personality. The personality that's carrying that definition, that, it's just saying, well, I'm not attracted to you. I've got all this. If I could speak for the genes, I have all this. How come you're attracted to me? I have all this. I'm not attracted to you. And so one of the things that compromise brings is that compromise brings this feeling that one isn't really loved, or love isn't really reciprocated. It's not just they get to do it and you can't do anything about it, which is the generic description of compromise. It doesn't matter, I've lived with it for a very long time, to have compromise in my life in the 1762 or the 4037. These are things that I've known all my life. And I have one gate. And the moment I meet that whole channel, it's like my gate doesn't matter anyway. It doesn't. It can't really contribute anything. It can't impact in any way. It can't do anything but shut up, or be still, or whatever it is, and accept the compromise. But at the genetic level, what one is accepting is disinterest. Disinterest. And it creates all the problems. And yet, compromise operates differently. Think about the projector now. This is a focused and absorbing aura. And it's focused. When the projector meets compromise, it absorbs it. It takes it right in and it focuses on it. And of course what that means is that the compromise is immediately a problem. Immediately. Because it's focused on it and it can't get away from it, no matter what the balance is in everything else. It's almost like they get stuck in that place. Compromise is very, very difficult for projectors. It's very difficult. Because they end up being focused on it. They don't see the forest for the trees. There's just this compromise that they see. And when they see the being, remember that a projector takes in the other in a unique way. It really does. It is, generators and projectors, they're the only ones that really have any kind of real sense of the other. Real sense of the other. The generator through enveloping the other, and the projector through being focused on their identity. On their identity. And what I mean by that is that they're really focused on the magnetic monopole. They're focused on this whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. And of course, the moment that there is a compromise for a projector, whenever they are focused on that identity, they cannot escape that aspect. It's there. It's like a thorn or a splinter. It's simply something that is there. Compromise for them, can be something that is just agonizing. Now go back for a moment and think about, the not-self themes of these types. Think about the generator and this openness and this enveloping and this deeply taking in the compromise. Their theme is frustration. And so that compromise, that deep compromise, brings out a deep frustration. And it's not simply the frustration that they can't get their way or that they can't meet halfway. It is a frustration that's even deeper. It's this sense that they're not necessary, you know? I mean, compromise brings really heavy things into the unconscious. You know, you got part of a channel and the other one's got the whole channel. They don't need you. They don't. Doesn't serve them any purpose, and yet it's a part of you. It's like saying, I've got 2 arms, I don't need yours. You know? It's part of you. And for the generator, it is deeply frustrating. You think about the manifestor in compromise. The first thing that comes out is anger. Anger. Just breeds it, and the anger simply pumps up the repulsion-repelling mechanism. And for the projector, bitterness. Bitter. Imagine what that's like, that every time they're focused on the identity, they can never escape the compromise. They can't. It's always there. This bitterness that they're not really seen, or they're not really appreciated, or they're not really of value, and all of that can feed off of compromise. For the reflector, you have a resistant and sampling aura. A resistant and sampling aura is quite similar in many ways to the manifestor. I mean, they're quite similar. But resistance is not being closed. And compromise is something that they dabble in. But it doesn't affect them so deeply. It doesn't. See, reflectors and manifestors are much more impacted by the daily program in terms of conditioning, than they are the other in that sense. And again, that isn't to diminish the fact that connections don't take place and so forth and so on. But the way in which their auras operate relative to the other is that it limits the level of the conditioning. It just does. But regardless, when you look at a reflector, you're looking at the master of compromise. I mean, the master of compromise. They have to do it all the time. Every time they meet a definition in somebody, they meet the potential of compromise. They meet it all the time. And it can lead to such deep bitterness. Deep. My earliest teaching to reflectors was trust the moon. And trust the moon. Wait for the cycle. Don't trust those forces that are around you. Don't trust that moment. You're always compromising. Always under that pressure. The deeper you look, the more you add to your general view, the more you begin to see the nuances that are there. And how important it is that, we begin to lay out what the consequences of these kinds of interrelationships are, and how different they are, to map them in that sense, because they are so different. They just are. I mean, think about what it's like to have a manifestor dominate you. Now, dominance is something very interesting. Dominance is when the other has a complete channel defined and you don't have any aspects in that channel. And dominance in a relationship can be something that's very special. I mean, it can be very special in the sense that it's a way of seeing the other in a way in which others see them. I mean, it's so interesting how many people have, in their relationship, have this perspective of their partner that other people don't have of that person. They don't see it. But when your partner has dominance with you, that dominance is always standing separate from your relationship. You can see that. The other thing is, well, it's highly educative. That is, you certainly learn about a process that you don't have, and obviously can be deeply conditioned by it. So dominance is an interesting thing. But look at the differences when you're looking at the way the types operate. Let's take a manifestor with a generator. The manifestor has the dominance. The generator is trying to envelop the manifestor with very little success. Right? It just does what it can to try to envelop it. Gets very little in return. Gets very little in return. And again, the moment that you're getting very little in return genetically, that's the moment that there are all kinds of things that arise. And of course, in the context of the generator, the first thing that comes to the surface is frustration. And what they are getting as an example from that manifestor, the dominance from the manifestor is that it actually has very little impact. It has very little impact. It's hard to grasp at first that when you're looking at these basic connections, despite the way that they operate mechanically, the aura changes everything. It doesn't change the basic mechanic, but it changes the way in which, that relative way in which that mechanic operates for each type, and not simply for each type, but each type in relation with the other. The manifestor with the projector. Think about a projector's aura. The projector's aura is like a kind of ice cream cone. It focuses in, it hones in on what we would call the G center. Hones in on that identity. But when a projector's with a manifestor, it can't do that. It just can't. It's like the manifestor aura has this, it's just repelling. It pushes it off. It doesn't let it get in. And of course, it doesn't matter whether, the projector is being impacted by this kind of connection or that kind of connection. The fact that the projector can't really get in, is disturbing for the projector. Period. Long before any quality of the connection can be understood. See, I've talked about it many, many times. Generators and projectors are meant for each other. Manifestors and reflectors are really not here for that kind of integrative relationship. They aren't. I've gone through so many different processes in talking about partnership and partnership relationships. And whenever I'm asked to talk about ideals, I always say the same thing. Only when we move away from the genetic imperative of our attraction to difference, only when we are the difference, each and every one of us uniquely, are we going to realize that the thing that we have always been looking for is a quality of sameness. That is, type with type, angle with angle. You will see that the longer you're involved in design, there are certain centers where that in the other, if they're not there, you're just immediately aware of it. And you're immediately aware of it because you're much more comfortable when those specific centers are defined. And it can be any of them. It simply depends on the pattern. It's so obvious to me, the difference between being with defined ego people. I have a defined ego. It's very obvious to me the difference between being with defined egos or undefined egos, defined throats or undefined throats, defined G's or undefined G's. And it is clear to me that as a manifestor, when I'm with manifestors, and it's interesting because in my male friends, most of them are manifestors, and the ones that aren't manifestors are projectors. I have no generator male friends in my life. And with manifestors, it's very interesting because the energy is so similar and in so many ways soothing, because it's just correct. And you've got closed and repelling auras with closed and repelling auras, and everybody's okay. And it's one of the things to really understand is that we're caught at the cusp of a change that's taking place. We're still locked into the genetic imperative, after all. This is the great seduction of the world. This is the great conditioning environment that is out there, seducing us to what we are not. And yet at some point in the process, as you absorb this knowledge, you get to a place where you realize that it makes an enormous difference. It does. The similarity makes an enormous difference. And that the only duality that's truly designed to interact with each other are generators and projectors. They are made for this process. And what we call connectivity, the electromagnetic and compromise and so forth and so on, to really understand that where this actually works properly, if I can use that word, is that it works properly within the context of generators and projectors. And I mean generators with generators, or projectors with projectors, or generators with projectors. They are the world. And the connections, by the way, are really for them. Reflectors and manifestors could do quite well without any connectivity, except that the genetic imperative would be lost, and we're still caught in mammalian bodies that have deep drives to reproduce themselves. But the reality is that this whole connectivity only truly functions correctly when it's operating through the generator or the projector, and does not operate correctly, if I can put it that way, when you're dealing with the manifestor and reflector. That is, it doesn't operate with, how can I put this, with what the goal of it is. You see, generators and projectors were born for each other. Not that they liked that idea, but nonetheless. If you put the two of them together, you have about 89%, maybe 90% of humanity. They really are the world, after all. Everything else is a fringe in connection to that. And everything about connectivity is about coming to grips with the fact that if generators and projectors don't get their trip together, none of us do. As a matter of fact, the way in which any connectivity in the world operates, regardless of what it is, has been determined by the generator-projector environment. It's this environment that establishes what the values of these things are. As a matter of fact, it's the generator that, in so many ways, is the judge, in that sense, of all of it. It's interesting about generators. They are the open enveloping ones. They are the ones that create the world. After all, projectors don't. Projectors are just good at focusing in and trying to see what's actually happening or what's working. But it's a generator that creates it. This is their deep power. And at the same time they create it, they are creating, in that sense, the electromagnetic fields, the compromises, the dominances, and the companionships. It's the generator going through these kinds of connections with the other that generates these thematics in the world that become, in that sense, what the standards are. It's like always the case with a generator when it's dealing with a reflector or a manifestor in particular, is that they realize right away that there's something wrong because they're not getting what they're giving. It just feels that way. That's true. It's true from the auric point of view and the way in which the auras are designed to interact. And you see the way in which the electromagnetic is supposed to work, a generator and a manifestor. You see they have a really sexy electromagnetic, and you figure there's going to be all kinds of sparks. Well, it isn't necessarily true. As a matter of fact, chances are that there's going to be very little sparking in that sense, because the auras don't naturally work well together. They don't. I mean, in the mythology of just thinking about, auras and types, I mean, generators were manifestors' slaves. Their auras were never intended to fit together. I mean, you either have slaves or the slaves rise up and kill you. But it's not like you all shake hands and decide to live happily ever after. It doesn't work that way. Manifestors and generators don't have that kind of relationship. They really don't. They were never intended to have that kind of relationship. And you see, the generators carry the vote, if I can put it that way. When I talk about the ascendancy of projectors, in fact, it's the generator's rejection of manifestors that is really leading to that, because, this is just a shifting of the binary. And the real potential is that in this shifting of the binary, finally you have, the combination and the auric process, the auric evolution at this point, that there can finally be this coming together of generator and projector, and the way in which the byproduct of that, the world we live in, the way that world can be. So looking at these themes of the way we connect to the other, begin with a number of things. When you're looking at the relationships, the ones in which connectivity are going to operate according to the way in which they're generally described is a generator with a generator, a projector with a projector, or a projector with a generator. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to experience it the same. Remember that they're very different. They're very different. And generators do not feel rewarded in their relationship with projectors. They don't. They don't. They feel like they're being taxed. They feel like they're paying a price in that sense for their openness without getting the reward that they expect. And remember that for a generator, the reward I'm talking about is nothing more than their own fantasy that everybody should be a generator. That's true. I mean, it's true. It's one of the interesting things to understand about generators is that it is their world. And they want everybody to be in their world and, to have the advantages of their world. And again, if you think about the not-self and you think about this vast swath of humanity that generates the way things are, and all of these generators want, when I use that, I'm metaphorically, they're designed, they're out of that, there's this expectation that everybody else is here to be open and enveloping. That everybody else has to be able to take the other in. To give and to take, that it's, that it's shared, it goes back and forth, it's all correct, I love you this much and you love me that much and it's perfect, it's exactly the same, everything's terrific, it's all this open, enveloping, boom, boom, boom. And of course projectors, like manifestors and reflectors, don't fit into that pattern, they don't. And so the generator is open and enveloping with the projector and feels frustrated because they're not being enveloped and they're not finding openness in return. As a matter of fact, projectors can seem so very narrow, because their aura is very focused. It's focused. They're trying to absorb, in that sense, the other. They're trying to get to the core of them. I mean, after all, this is the great gift of the projector, is to recognize the other. And ultimately, the potential in being able to recognize the other, to be able to be of value to the other, guidance to the other. And yet, in that relationship, in that not-self relationship, the opening, enveloping generator is frustrated because the projector doesn't seem to be giving them and is only taking. And the projector is bitter because the generator, in its open and enveloping, doesn't see its identity and who it really is. The projector expecting the generator to be focused and absorbing. And the projector is bitter that the generator can't be focused and absorbing. See, every type has its prejudice. After all, I mean, type is It's a real powerful demarcation. You know, the differences in type are quite something. I mean, manifestors are always astonished that other beings are enclosed and repelling. What's the matter with them? What do they want? You know, what's all this openness for? You know, why are you focusing over here? You know? I mean, the aura's different. And they look out at the other auras, and when they meet the other aura, the first thing that they realize is, you're not like me at all. It's so interesting. You see, the manifestor and the reflector, I mean, they're on the sidelines. And the way in which they are perceived, the way in which they are perceived by the other, you know, is all being conditioned, and it's all being conditioned by the way in which generators and projectors, in their lack of awareness and in not self, are frustrated and bitter with each other for not being each other. I've always considered generators to be the real holy ones. Their life. And it was always clear to me that generators as life were given this enormous gift, this potential in response to find surrender and acceptance. Open and enveloping out of awareness and correctness is just open and enveloping without expectation. Without expectation. I mean, at the simplest level, one of the things that human design shows anyone is a need to accept the other because there's nothing you can do about it. And I mean, I think that this is perhaps one of the deepest aspects of the knowledge. You know, simply to be able to see the other is what they are. You know, and if you cannot deal with them, then, you know, you're better off not being in a relationship with them. But it's not like you're here to change them or fix them or alter them. And you see, for the generator that establishes the basic format of all our interactions by its very openness. As life, we are intended to be open. As life, we are intended to envelop the other. We're being conditioned, those of us who are non-sacral. This is what life is for us. And at the same time, that open and enveloping, when it's correct, is not looking for anything in return. You know, this is what it's really all about. You know, it's like that wonderful line, art for art's sake. You know, the serendipity, the wonder of being isn't something that comes to you when you have a set intention. You know, there's all these crazy intention people running around. You know, the most extraordinary things happen to you when you're just being. You know, that's what generators are here for, to be. You know, they are the great beers. This is what it's all about. And as long as generators are not operating correctly, as long as, you know, what they get from another generator is all right, but what they get from the other types are not, if you know what I mean. In other words, generators have to begin to see that their most important relationships are always going to be with another generator. It's so important for generators. You know, the more generators are with generators, the healthier their process is. You know, how wonderful it is to be able to have a relationship rooted in the respect of response. And rooted in a relationship that is based on openness and envelopment, which is very special. It is the life force. But the moment that you integrate that with other types, the moment that you do that, you know, if you're still operating out of the old conditioning, then you're going to end up with the same dilemmas. You know, for me it's clear that, you know, the the claptrap I hear about the generator-projector relationship and the perspective of projectors on generators and vice versa is an indication to me that, that still is a bridge that has to be crossed. And of course the same thing is true for the projector. And the projector has a dilemma in that they are a non-energy type. So there always appears to be an equation for them. When I look at manifestors, projectors, and reflectors, without offending anybody, I kind of jokingly think of them as parasites. And again, I don't want to upset anybody, but it's sort of like that. I mean, we all live off the generators. I mean, we all live off the generator world. We do. And, regardless whether manifestors and reflectors, oracally speaking, would like to poo-paw all that, the fact is that we live in a generator world. For projectors, it's not their fault that, they have to tap into the energy of life in order to survive. They do. They're not just a generator that, its very breath is a life force. They have to tap into the life force all the time, and they're often seen as, using generators as filling stations. And again, it is a projection on the projector and a real handicap for them in many ways. And of course, that goes along with the perception that they would receive in terms of their relationship to the generator with their focused and absorbing aura. They're not open. They're not. They're very, very focused. They're very focused. And they don't envelop in that sense. They absorb, they take in from the other. They have to, after all. I mean, think about the projector and reflector, and think about the secondary keynotes, absorbing and sampling. Again, you're dealing with two non-energy types, and you can see that they have to take something. The projector absorbs, the reflector samples. Look at the manifestor. Manifestors don't need generators in that sense. They can manifest. They don't need the energy resource. They need to tap into the life force, but they don't need the energy resource. But projectors and reflectors, they have to. They have to connect to the generating field. And so while the projector is focused and absorbing, taking it all in, and the generator is looking for the open and enveloping in return, it doesn't get it. And the projector doesn't understand any of that. They don't. They don't even notice that they're being enveloped. I mean, nobody is conditioned better than projectors. Yeah, I mentioned to you that the generator aura is an open and enveloping aura, and therefore they are the most conditioned in the sense of the depth of conditioning. But you also have to see that they're generators. And they generate a conditioning field. And they can generate an incredibly powerful conditioning field. And think about the projector. It's focused and absorbed on the identity of the generator while the generator has enveloped it and is conditioning it with its force. And in most cases, the projector is not aware of how deep the conditioning is going in because they don't notice it. I mean, they're the great binary, generators and projectors. I mean, generators were born with know thyself stamped above their navel, I mean, right there, And the projector comes in, and somebody is immediately pointing a finger at the other. Look over there, look over there, look over there. How different they are. How different. And you see, the projector wants to be seen. Being enveloped does not mean you're seen. Does not mean you're recognized. I mean, generators just envelop as a matter of course. You go into a supermarket, you sit in a theater, whatever. I mean, there doesn't have to be intention or, any kind of plan behind it. They're a walking, open enveloping machine. They're just, it's all over. When you think about auras and the way auras work, you also have to recognize something else. This is describing the type. This is what type is. Type is a name that we give to the quality of the aura. The quality of the aura is the direct byproduct of the work of the monopole, of holding the vehicle together in the illusion of its separateness. This quantum totality that we call our lives. To understand type this way is to really begin to see the importance of all type for type work. One of the things that we're introducing at the beginning of the second semester is the new Living Your Design guide program. And it's very important that people who enter into the process of human design have the support that they need. That is, that they have an other that can help them in the early stages of their experiment, to give them guidance, give them courage, whatever language you want to use, knowledge. And of course, one of my desires in that sense is to be able to have guides that are simply type available. They're available by type. If you're a projector and you're going to have an analysis from a generator or a manifestor, whatever, or a course, or whatever the case may be, you're already at a handicap. You're already at a deep handicap. The moment that you understand the way the auras work, you can see that. And again, it's something for us to understand about relationships in our lives, that, our type for type relationships are so healthy for us. And again, I'm not suggesting that, you leave your lover or abandon your children because they're not the right type. It's not what it's about. It's just about beginning to learn to recognize the beauty of sameness. And I think that, if there's any real message, we're on the cusp of a mutative transformation. And we're moving away from attraction of difference to the potential attraction of sameness. And it's something that you need to see and you need to experience. It's very, very important. And to begin to understand that, the really successful relationships of the future are relationships that begin at the basic level of the being's understanding their aura and the way that it works. The other thing is that if you're in a mixed type relationship, that this knowledge is very important. It can allow you to understand the limitations of the potential of your connectivity to the other. As a matter of fact, it doesn't have to hurt it in that sense. It doesn't have to deny it its potential. Awareness can be very useful in such things. You simply need to accept the limitation that it brings, and it does. I know this as a manifestor, that in any relationship, oracally, I have very little to give. Nothing I can do about that. And yet it does not mean that I don't have a depth of love or affection or concern or any of those things, because I do. I do. And yet at the same time, there's very, very little that my aura can handle. Just very little. And anybody that's going to accept me in their lives, are going to have to accept that that's my nature without seeing, or equating that with some kind of psychological description, There's something wrong with you because, you don't really blah, 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 and you're not open, and you're not this or that, or whatever the case may be. And it's something that I've known all of my life. It's something that I'm deeply aware of. And there's nothing one can do about it. It's just the way the aura is. It has nothing to do with the spirit of the being, the heart, the soul, blah, 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 all these things. It's just aura. It's just aura. And you see, one of the most comfortable things is the moment that you begin to see that your connection to the sameness, particularly in type, beginning with type, it also opens up the full potential of your aura. I mean, generators are here to be open and enveloping with each other. And they can get extraordinary with that. I mean, after all, just about everybody else, the other 30%, is really closed off in some way or another. And if it weren't for the generators, there would not be this potential of openness in humanity. There would not be this potential of brothership and sisterhood and blah, 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 and this and that and all these things. We would not be necessarily gregarious social creatures that we are. It's the generators that bring us this. It's the generators that bring us openness, and bring us openness to each other, and a willing to be open to each other. And we have to see, this quality that is so beautiful and is so important in our lives, that it's operating out of the realm of the not-self. You have all these beings who don't operate correctly. And you have all these beings who have very deep, very lasting judgments about the other without realizing or even grasping at any level that this is just about auras. There are differences in us that there's nothing one can do about that. You can simply accept them for what they are, nothing more, nothing less. I guess one of those aspects in partnership analysis that's often given the cold shoulder is companionship. I mean, when you think about the way in which we connect with the other, electromagnetic has this spark to it that can make it very interesting, and both in the positive and negative sense. The thing that sparks a row or whatever the case may be, but there's a spark. And so it gets a lot of attention. And then there's compromise, and of course compromise is just nasty, so it always gets attention. Dominance is great. Dominance is one of those things that can be, as I said, very interesting in relationships, because it really allows you to see your partner as somebody else. You have no idea, well, maybe you do, but it's one of those things that's so extraordinary, is what happens to a couple, any couple, it doesn't matter, whatever the relationship. The moment you bring two people together, you get something that's not them. I mean, after all you have to do is put two charts together to see right away that the chart that's created out of those two charts has nothing to do with the original, in a sense. It's very different. The beast with two backs, whatever name you want to give it, it's something else. And so you only see the other within the context of the way in which you connect to them. I mean, this is the way that you see them. Now, the advantage of dominance is that aspect of your partner that's dominating, that you get to see, it's also something that somebody else who knows your partner sees. In other words, it's a way of seeing your partner away from you, which is often really necessary in relationships in order to be able to just accept the integrity of the bond. I mean, after all, when we're talking about personal bonds of love and that kind of relationship, my advice has always been, get your own room. And it is one of those things that really enhances the potential of being able to appreciate the relationship and yet at the same time maintain your individual integrity. It's very easy to get lost in relationships. But the one thing that's rarely discussed And, when the subject comes up, is companionship, because it's kind of, well, it's kind of ho-hum. It isn't very exciting. Companionship is when, basically you have the same channel defined, or if you go to another level, the same gates activated together, open to the other side. Companionship is sameness. And within the way in which genetics operate, there is no attraction there. None. It's interesting to note that. In other words, when you're looking at connectivity, the one connectivity that the genes are not in favor of is companionship. I mean, dominance can be very exciting. I mean, not to get into it. It's popular level, but just the excitement of having somebody who has something that you don't have, and it's a learning process. It can be very interesting, very stimulating. Again, suits the genes because it's something that you don't have. But the moment you're dealing with companionship, it denies the genes what they're looking for. They don't want. I mean, after all, the genes are interested in reproduction. Reproduction demands very different genetic material in order to have a healthy, different offspring. And of course, companionship means that you have genes that are similar. It's not, as far as the genetics are concerned, it's not something that is exciting. Therefore, it's not something that we notice immediately, nor is it something that turns us on. I had it's one of those great human design stories. In the very early years of my training people, I think it was in '93, here on the island in Ibiza, and I did a couple of trainings over a period of, I think, about 3 months. And there was a woman in the first training and a woman in the second training, and they both had the same chart. I mean, they both had the same chart. It was very interesting. They were both born on the same day. They were born within 15 minutes of each other. They would have had different tone and base, but nonetheless, the surface chart was the same. They had both been sannyasins. Both had been to and lived in and around Pune at various times. Both of them had common friends that they knew. They had never met each other. I mean, they had never met each other. It was hilarious. And it was the extreme in that sense of that kind of companionship in which there's simply no attraction. I mean, it's like going into a party. You go into a room full of people. Your genes are not going to alert you to anyone who's like you. They're not. It's the last thing that they want to do. They don't want deformed, retarded babies. They want you to be interested in something that's entirely different and therefore genetically valuable. So companionship's an odd thing. But think about the exalted beauty of this companionship. What can happen in companionship? I mean, after all, what you have is the sharing, let's say the sharing of a channel together. And it doesn't matter what the channel happens to be. But think about that companionship as in the way in which it works between two generators. Between two generators, here is a way in which they can share something at a very, very deep level that they're both natural at, if I can put it that way. And in them it is the perfection of it. Yet at the same time, if you're operating correctly, and I mean, operating correctly is quite a thing, that you can see that in companionship you can also see the acceptance of the difference in that sense of type. What it would mean for a generator or a projector to accept in companionship the way in which the other does or operates in the same general vein. For example, let's say that let's have something that is non-generative. Let's say you have the 4037. Let's say you have a companionship between a generator and a projector in the 4037. You know right away that the generator is going to be very open and enveloping in relationship to community. And the projector is going to be very focused on specifics and absorbing in the community. Yet they're both going to be able to share the companionship of, enjoying whatever language you want to use, their involvement in the community together, and seeing and accepting their different way of doing it. The generator not expecting the projector to be open and enveloping, and the projector not expecting the generator to be focused and absorbing. How important it is that in many ways companionship in relationships are keys to bring peace to cross-type connections. And it's really what I'm getting at. In other words, it's not always easy to find some kind of bridge, some kind of tool that can be helpful, because so many people obviously come to human design after they have entered into all kinds of incorrect relationships, and many of those leading to families and all kinds of things, that it's important to have certain tools and guides that we can offer. And I think companionship is one of those keys. When it's there, again, realize that the not-self is not attracted to companionship. Companionship is invariably a byproduct of a lot of electromagnetic and compromise showing up. In other words, there's all this stuff going on, and buried underneath somewhere may be a companionship. Yet it's that companionship that may be the way in which to open up the understanding between the partners. And I think that anyone who is going to counsel anyone about the relationship with the other has to counsel that relationship within the context of their aura. This is something that I feel is a very important developmental area in the way in which we share the knowledge of human design. I think it's very important to expand upon the basic keynoting of type, so that the broader our general audience, because the general audience grows every day, the need for language that is honest and truly representative. And I think it's very important that we get beyond the anger, frustration, and bitterness and disappointment to begin to put that into the context of the aura itself, and to begin to change the way in which we look at our auric relationship, our type-to-type relationship with the other. If we're going to see the relationship with the other at all, it begins with this surface of seeing it in relationship to their aura, so that you can right away understand the limitation of what's possible in the connection, by first grasping, in that sense, the way your own aura works, and in understanding its limitation. And then in seeing that in your connection with the other, lover, children, parents, business associates, you name it, to begin to see that you need to redefine the way you look at them by seeing them through the way in which they work as a being. The aura is, this is the way in which the life energy truly presents itself. This is the true surface of the being. And it's here that you can learn so many things, because it's here that the basic grasp of what a type exists. The basic grasp. Parents and children. What that means. I'm a manifestor father, and I have generator children. And they're open and enveloping, and I'm closed and repelling. And they all know the limitation of my aura. They do. And it's not a handicap, because they know what I feel for them within the context of whatever our relationship happens to be. But you see, without awareness, that's a very difficult situation. It just is. I'm not enveloping as the mother of my sons. I'm just not. I can never envelop them. They have a generator mother, so they get enveloped. I cannot do that. And you see, so many human beings in their relationships with others suffer so deeply in ignorance because they do not see and they cannot accept their limitation and their true nature. It's not a handicap. It's not like my children lack for anything. They have a manifestor father. This is what they have. It's just the way that it works. I have, on the other side, generator children. It's just the way that it goes. But there's a grace. There's a grace that comes with understanding the limitation, because it means that, you cannot try to condition around that. You can't. And you cannot make an effort to be something that you're not, which beings are doing all the time, and is so disastrous to their well-being. I mean, your aura, when your aura is correct, you are physically well. Just at a very basic level. Physically well. In the moment that you're not operating correctly, there are problems in the aura. There are. And all the tensions that come with it and all those things. And obviously, you're dealing with partnerships. It's something that I talk about regularly on my radio segment. It's not enough to experiment yourself and to be aware of what's going on. You have to be aware of the impact on the other. How deeply the people in your lives are conditioned. How far away they are from the acceptance and understanding of their own limitation. And that you cannot do this in a vacuum. You can't. We're not alone. And I think that in order to really get to a place of grace, how you accept another being into your life, that when you can see them within the context of your aura, I think it will give you an opportunity to be able to express to them in the way that you deal with them a quality of acceptance they do not know, and a quality of acceptance that should be normal for all of us. To simply be able to accept that it is the way that it is. I have my projector friends in this life, and I see the nature of their process and what to do. It is what it is. And the moment that you can accept whatever somebody's design is the moment that you yourself make a leap forward. So the other becomes a real understanding of aura. And then the subtleties that are there, these connection subtleties that are there, to see that they vary, to see that the real archetype remains something exclusively in the hands of the generator. How all of this is supposed to work. And it says to me something very important, that generators who find companionship with others, and particularly that find companionship with other types, that how important this can be in being able to share with them whatever language, empower, whatever it may be, support them by simply accepting them for what they are and accepting their aura for what it is. And for you to begin to see that as you continue your process of experimenting with correctness, that correctness moves you towards sameness. It does, because that's what's comfortable. We're all here to find companionship. It is part of our makeup. And at the moment that we go through the transformation of the way in which our sexuality operates and the way in which our intimacy operates, that a door will open up to the potentials of companionship and the beauty that is there in being able to, share with the other this deep, basic similarity. How rewarding that is in many ways, and how much peace that brings to the potential of a relationship. Once the dilemmas, after all, any cross-type relationship starts with a basic dilemma. And whether you're ever going to get across that barrier and actually get to the development and evolution of the true relationship, it's questionable. It's why sameness companionship in that sense can lay a foundation for developing a higher level of relationship with the other. One that's not caught up with, the discrimination and the dilemmas that arise out of being different aurically. And it's very important to get this information across. It's very important that people begin to understand their type within the context of its aura. It will help them with a deeper understanding of why things have worked out the way they have in their lives and the way in which they connect with others.